Hello, my beautiful earthlings. So I wanted to share something that I was shown. I was falling asleep one evening, as one does. And I don't know if this happens for you, but sometimes it's like right as I'm falling asleep, when I'm like kind of in between realms, awake and asleep, I receive the craziest downloads and imagery. And I'm always like, can't we just do this during the day? Because I can't really, I'm always like, remember, Chelsea, remember, remember, Chelsea, remember. I usually do. And so what they were showing me planet Earth. It was like from like a bird's eye view or like an astronaut's eye view. And they're just showing me as normal Earth. And then they put this sort of red matrix looking web all around it, all across it. And it was kind of like pulsating bright red. It was like a grid, but I say spider's web because the shapes weren't even. It was kind of like all crisscrossy and all over the place. And it kind of floated like in the atmosphere over the Earth. So I was like, oh, so what is that? Like it's, what we would call the matrix. And it didn't look friendly. No surprise there. Didn't look, pure or anything like that. And I was like, okay, so thanks for showing me this. And I was just kind of watching what it was doing, and the lines were kind of moving, and just it was becoming in some spaces cleaner and then some spaces more condensed and messy. I'm like, okay, so that's the matrix. And I was thinking we live in a world of polarity and duality. I'm like, so show me the universal grid of consciousness, or show me sort of the divine grid that encompasses Earth. And so they switched it and they showed me the divine grid. And it was kind of light blue white, and it was definitely more grid-like, like really clean squares, but not as condensed. And so it floated in the atmosphere, similar to how the matrix was. So it wasn't like closer to Earth or farther from Earth as far as like the radius of height from the grid to ground, if you will. But the squares were quite large from what I could see. And I'm like, oh, so it doesn't cover as much. And they're like, well, no, not really. Right now for Earth's history or the ascension process, like the matrix does cover more ground, so to speak, than the divine grid. Like, but don't worry about it. But they're just kind of showing me like, yeah, that's like a logistical representation of what's going on energetically with Earth. And they're like, but let us point out something. They're like, yeah, so there's a lot of open space within the divine grid, meaning there's not enough human consciousness connected to the divine grid to make it fuller and to cover more space on Earth, meaning having more light, be in power than dark. But they're like, let us show you the sort of divine grid of consciousness for plants. And so they kept the blue grid, and they allowed this plant, this green, they use the color green grid to sort of blanket over the human consciousness divine grid. And it filled up more of the space, and it was kind of bright green and floating in smaller squares, but filled it up more. I'm like, oh, okay, that covers up more terrain. And then they're like, let us add in, animals and minerals as well too. So they had I think it was like a yellow or pink kind of grid come on. And so when we layered the consciousness divine grid with the plant consciousness and the animal and mineral consciousness, it actually filled up most all the space almost as equally as the matrix. And I was like, oh, so we're good. Like we're casual. They're like, well, here's the catch. Yes, you have this ability, you have this access to create a stronger grid of universal consciousness energy to permeate the Earth, but not all humans are connected to plants and animals. Not all humans are connected to the minerals and to the mountains and to the trees. That's why we only showed you the divine grid, the blue one first. And I was like, oh, okay. And so they just sort of showed me this history. It brought to mind that meme, or where it's like humans are the real virus, and they're like, look, humans have been on Earth for 2.5 million years. For a majority of that time, for millions of years, even though humans then were kind of like glorified apes, but for a majority of the time, we cohabited Earth quite peacefully and in a balanced manner. It wasn't until the last several thousand years, and then even if we want to go last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, that we started creating a disbalance and a disconnect from Earth. If you think of tribes people all over the world, they can touch the ground and know that elk have walked there. They had a stronger connection to Earth. And through industrialization and through technology, there's been a disconnect. And what they are showing me is, though, we have the capability, we have the ability and possibility to reconnect to the elements of Earth to create a stronger, more profound grid of light. Our sort of learning lesson here is how to create balance with technology and industry with the elements. So that's sort of where we're at right now, where it's like we had the technological revolution probably within the last 20 or 30 years. And it advanced quite quickly, and with that came a lot of pollution. And we know what's going on with Earth, most of us do, but they're just reminding me, like, we have this ability to connect once again. We just need to learn how to balance it, and that's kind of where a majority of us are right now. And it reminds me of this quote too. So simple solution, you're like, what do I do? Simple solution is you can connect with nature. You can talk to the trees, the plants, the animals. It might feel silly. I talk to trees all the time. I see dolphins in the ocean. I'm like, hey guys, and they go, hey. So we have this ability, and it reminds me of this quote. I can't remember the author of the quote, but if you connect to nature, connecting to nature will be the quickest way to connect to spirit. And it's this reminder, a lot of us, our intuitive gifts, our psychic gifts are coming online right now. The last 10 years, it's been crazy, the mass ascension we have experienced. And getting into nature, connecting to those elements will make your personal grid stronger and add to the divine grid that encompasses Earth. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. I love you. Bye-bye.